All right, let's just jump straight into this explainer. We're unraveling the epic story of India's textile industry. And honestly, it's a wild ride. It stretches from absolute global dominance right down to some pretty intense modern day struggles and ambitious goals for the future. We're going to look at how a nation that literally closed the world centuries ago is now fighting tooth and nail to reclaim its spot on the global stage. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the historic cotton empire, move into the black cotton experiment, tackle the global apparel race, and finally, look at rebuilding the cotton economy.
Okay, part one, the historic cotton empire, from supremacy to prohibition.
To set the scene, picture this. It's the late 17th century, and the English East India Company introduces Britain to cheap Indian calico and chintz cloth. What started as just a novelty sideline absolutely exploded. I mean, these imported Indian cottons became so incredibly popular, they totally eclipsed the traditional spice trade in value. And as you can probably guess, this absolutely terrified Britain's domestic wool and linen producers. Shepherds, weavers, dyers, they were up in arms over this bright, affordable imported fabric taking over their market. The sheer scale of India's dominance here is kind of mind-blowing. The British Parliament literally had to ban Indian cotton just to protect their own industries. It started with a 10% tariff in 1685, escalated to blocking imports entirely by 1698, and culminated in the super strict Calico Act of 1721, which banned the sale of most printed cottons completely. It was just a massive act of economic protectionism. But in a twist of fate, it inadvertently forced Britain to mechanize its own spinning and weaving, which actually helped kickstart the Industrial Revolution. Moving on to part two. The beet cotton experiment, a promise of agricultural salvation. So you really have to wonder, what happened to India's cotton supremacy? How do you go from holding a historic global monopoly to struggling in today's market? Well, to answer that, we actually have to look away from the factories and look down into the dirt at a massive, decades-long agricultural experiment. Enter BT cotton. Introduced in 2002, this is a genetically modified variety engineered specifically to produce a toxin that targets the pink bollworm, which is just a devastating pest that ruins both the fiber and the seed, and it caught on like wildfire. By 2014, a staggering 90% of Indian cotton farms had adopted it. Millions of farmers were basically betting their entire livelihoods on this single piece of technology to save their crops. And the initial promise was exactly what they wanted to hear. Better pest protection, higher yields, and way bigger profits. Early on, it actually worked. But the long-term reality played out so differently. Cotton cultivation slowly morphed into this highly input-intensive beast. Farmers found themselves heavily reliant on buying commercial seeds every single year, not to mention all the chemical fertilizers, the pesticides, and the huge lines of credit just to afford it all. The age-old practice of traditional seed saving practically vanished overnight.
The real breaking point was a shocking 35% decline in yields in recent years. Why? Because nature always finds a way to adapt. The pink bollworm actually developed a resistance to the Bt toxin. So as the pest came roaring back and yields flatlined, countless small farmers found themselves trapped in a brutal, unavoidable cycle of debt. They were caught right between the skyrocketing costs for seeds and chemicals and failing harvests. It's a pretty stark reminder of what happens when you treat a complex ecology just like an industrial input.
All right, let's shift gears to part three, the global apparel race, competing in the modern market. This 2025 scoreboard paints a really undeniable picture. In the global apparel trade, India is trailing pretty far behind some much smaller nations. Look at China, dominating with over $151 billion. But then look at Vietnam at nearly $40 billion, and Bangladesh right on their heels. India, despite its incredible history and this massive workforce, is only exporting about $16 billion in clothing. They're capturing less than 4% of the global apparel trade. Now, even though China's garment exports have technically shrunk a bit recently due to tariffs and supply chain shifts, they still hold nearly 30% of the entire global market. But here is the truly fascinating strategic pivot. China is aggressively moving to dominate the raw textile supply. So they might be sewing fewer shirts, sure, but they are absolutely providing the fabric. In fact, 44% of the value-added materials in Vietnam's apparel exports come straight from China. Meanwhile, India's share remains stubbornly stuck below that 4% mark. Making matters worse, India has also had to navigate some severe geopolitical shocks. For a while, India got hit with a massive, temporary 50% U.S. tariff penalty tied to Russian oil purchases.
And yeah, that specific penalty was replaced by a flat 10% temporary US tariff earlier this year. But that shift basically wiped out India's previous competitive tariff edge over rivals like Vietnam and Bangladesh. It just shows you how fast international policy changes can completely upend domestic manufacturing.
So India is getting squeezed from basically all sides right now. First off, labor. Indian manufacturing wages are around $145 a month, which is just slightly too expensive to compete in the basic garment segment that Bangladesh dominates at $135. Second is materials. 60% of the global clothing market is synthetic these days, but strict Indian import duties on polyester lock domestic firms out of that super lucrative space. And finally, infrastructure. Unlike their competitors, only about a third of Indian cotton farms are actually using modern irrigation techniques, which severely limits how much they can grow.
But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. India actually has a really massive silver lining here. You see, unlike Bangladesh, whose economy is super vulnerable to global export slowdowns because ready-made garments make up 13% of their GDP, India's saving grace is its own internal consumption. India has this sprawling $225 billion domestic market that's growing at 10 to 12% every single year. That incredible domestic engine acts as a huge shock absorber against all the craziness in international trade. Which brings us to part 4, rebuilding the cotton economy, finding the path forward. With India officially targeting $100 billion in textile exports by 2030, we have to ask, how do they get there? Well, a really powerful example of resilience actually comes from looking backwards to move forwards. Take the Crocodona Organic Farm, which started experimenting way back in 1989. They proved that if you return cotton to a holistic rural ecosystem, meaning you include local ginning, hand spinning, natural dyeing, and weaving, you create genuine community self-reliance. It stops treating cotton like just another industrial raw material and brings it back as the beating heart of a rural economy. A massive piece of this puzzle is breaking away from the monocropping mindset. Historically, cotton was always grown right alongside pulses, millets, and vegetables. This traditional multi-cropping gave farms natural ecological safeguards, like way better soil health, natural pest control, and multiple streams of income for the farmer. All of that vanished when cotton became a monocrop, which led straight to soil degradation, major financial vulnerability, and a huge loss of biodiversity. Getting that balance back is absolutely vital for these farmers to survive and thrive. At the exact same time, on the macroeconomic level, India is fighting back hard with some aggressive diplomacy. The government is rapidly using free trade agreements to chip away at the trade access lead that Vietnam has enjoyed for years. And it's working. Recent wins like the India-UK CETA and the IFTA enforcement are already putting points on the board, with exports jumping significantly in major markets like Japan and Hong Kong. Ultimately, rebuilding India's textile empire requires pulling all these threads together. Step 1, we have to revive traditional, locally adapted seed diversity, so farmers aren't stuck buying commercial seeds forever. Step 2, encourage multi-crop organic farming to heal the soil and fight off pests the natural way. And step 3, fiercely support local value addition, like spinning and weaving. It's all about combining the deep ecological wisdom of diverse farms with the modern innovation of global trade agreements. And that brings us to the end of our journey today, leaving us with one massive open question. Can India successfully bridge the gap between its absolutely unparalleled historic cotton legacy, the tough agrarian realities its farmers face today, and the highly synthetic, hyper-competitive future of global apparel? It really is one of the most vital economic balancing acts of our time. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this sparks you to dig even deeper into the threads that quite literally connect our world. Catch you next time.